Well, good afternoon, everybody who is still here. My name is Joshua Salter. I am a licensed athletic counselor in the Psychological Health and Performance Department here at CU. I have the honor of introducing our esteemed guest for this afternoon, Dr. Nicole Bean. She serves as the Senior Director of Academics and Student Athlete Success. Dr. Bean strengthens, develops, and implements Big 12 programming and initiatives related to academics, awards, and student athlete development across a wide range of stakeholders. She is also the staff liaison to student athlete development and athletics academic leads and campus career services. Dr. Bean previously served as the Associate Athletics Director of DEI at the University of Oklahoma, where she was responsible for developing, managing, and implementing DEI strategies, policies, and initiatives for all athletic staff and student athletes. She oversaw the Athletics Diversity Council Graduate Assistantship Program, OU Athletics Graduate Assistantship Program, Athletics DEI Subcommittee, and the Athletes United Affinity Group, so only a few things. Prior to OU, Dr. Bean was the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Special Projects at Bacone College, which included oversight of the athletics department, briefly serving as the interim athletics director in 2020, and was on the president's executive team. Previously, she worked at Langston University as an assistant professor in health, physical education, and recreation, and was the faculty athletics representative, director of interns, SAC advisor, and a member of the university's Institutional Review Board for Diversity. Dr. Bean received her PhD in health, leisure, and human performance from Oklahoma State University. She also holds a Master's of Science in Education and Sports Administration and a Bachelor of Science in Athletic Training. She is a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation and a member of Thopthoko Tribal Town, if I said that correctly. The title of her talk is Navigating the Path Forward in DEI and Advancing DEI in Turbulent Times. Without further ado, Dr. Bean.
Hello, hello, hello. How's everybody doing? I know I'm the last session, so I need you to still have all the energy you had when I got here. I came a little late, so if you come in late, it's okay too, at 9:15 this morning. That was the longest intro, and you did an amazing job. So if nothing else, hopefully I'm qualified to at least be up here on stage and have a conversation with you all. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I like to move and talk with my hands, so me having to stay in front of this mic or get the mic and so we're either going to be dodging or my camera's going to have to follow me a lot of places. But I'm going to try to stay stationary, but that's usually not very much fun. So as said, I work for the Big 12 Conference Office. I'm excited to be here. Welcome Colorado back to the Big 12 Conference. We are super excited to have you all come back, but also just want to say thank you to Dewan and his team for inviting me out to speak. I see some familiar faces, so I was glad to be able to connect with Chris. I saw Lauren as well. Did she leave me? She left me. Tell her I was looking for her. I'm so excited to be here today. I like to have a conversation, so I'm standing up here just kind of serving as the facilitator, but this is an open conversation. A lot of the presenters have talked about collaboration, and so this will be a collaborative presentation, if you will, and they've also talked about just a co-learning space. So although I'm up here talking, I expect you all to engage. You don't have to wait till the end to do like the Q&A and wait for your question. If I'm talking about something and you all are the experts as well, because again, you have your own lived experiences that place you as such, feel free to say, hey, I have an example, interrupt me. Again, I have a dear friend, I'll be calling on her quite often, Joanna, from Oklahoma State University, that's joined us as well. We've done a lot of collaboration, so I'll apologize in advance to her for referring to her quite often. But again, this is a session for us to engage and have those conversations. And so if there's a place where I'm speaking and you want to chime in and share your experience, ask a question, feel free. Please don't wait to the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started today. Navigating the Path Forward in DEI. Going to focus on legislation pieces today and kind of how we navigate that with a lot of these anti-DEI legislation pieces. So kind of our path today, I'll do a brief intro on legislation. By no means will I cover it in detail, but we'll just kind of talk about the number of laws, how it's affecting the Big 12 Conference now that we cover a wide range of states in different time zones. We'll also talk about legislative strategies, and so at the conference level, obviously we're going to have a legislative strategy, a larger overview, but I'll also focus a little bit on states. So that way we can talk about, because again, the legislation is going to vary by states. And so how does that look for us at a conference level, but also how do we individually support the various entities that sit in different states, and so our institutions there. We'll talk about best practices, and then you see that reflection and discussion piece. So again, no Q&As here, just more so reflection and discussion. So that way, if you haven't spoken during my presentation at some point, that I'm going to try to pull some of your lived experiences and your viewpoints out so that we can really engage. Is everybody okay with that? That was a little dry. Okay, all right. So if we need to get and be active, I can do that as well. All right. So again, just briefly going to cover a little bit about D&I in regards to legislation pieces. As we know, anti-D&I laws when it's come to higher education has really been something that's at the forefront. So there's been about roughly 40 laws that's been introduced as of January of 2024, with the latest being Utah. That's kind of targeting D&I. Now, the bills impact a wide range of things, and so, again, every bill that's been introduced, and again, introduced, not necessarily approved, but that's been introduced, covers a wide range of things when we're talking about D&I. So it goes from defunding D&I totally. It's also going to talk about programming. Training, so again, required training not only for staff, but maybe for students. So it may affect just staff, may affect students, or it may affect both. And then we also have it where it's curriculum. So there's going to be some states like the state of Florida where curriculum is affected, but then we have some states like Oklahoma or Texas where curriculum is not. Oh, thank you. See, I'm over here just, y'all are missing my pretty slides and everything. Thanks, Juan. Okay, back to business. There's my pretty slide again. So again, looking a little bit at the DEI legislation, so that way you don't have to look at me. You have these great slides that I made for you all. And so we also have the curriculum piece, as I mentioned. So there's going to be some states that are going to really be affected where curriculum is no longer going to be able to be taught over certain things like critical race theory, racism, those different things. Then you have some states where curriculum isn't affected, so you still have faculty that has that academic freedom, if you will, as well. You also have the D&I statements that we're now seeing being affected, so no longer using those D&I statements in regards to hiring, which again is going to affect that hiring practice as well. And so when you begin to look at this map that I have here, just to give you a more visual, because I'm a visual learner, and so it makes more sense when I have something of that nature, you really begin to look and see how much these anti-D laws or legislations or bills, rather, are kind of affecting the United States. And so again, you can see the code, the key at the top. The red is going to just represent kind of on the watch, so there's some conversations there that's taking place. You also have the dark blue, so bills have been introduced or approved. And so again, just want to be mindful when we're talking today, I may mention some states. It doesn't mean that that bill has been approved, it's just been introduced. And introduced could mean that maybe it went to the governor vetoed parts of it, so it went back to the floor. Doesn't mean that it can never resurface, and we'll talk about that when it's on the floor. I am by no means an expert, but I felt like I sounded like one there, so I need to give you the disclaimer that I am, in fact, not an expert when it comes to those things, but have had to experience some of that sitting in some of my places, and so we'll work through that today. But if you are an expert, I've already told you that you were, and so you get to chime in. So again, if you're looking at here, then we see the turquoise, if you will, or the light blue, depending on what color you want that to be, that's no bills. And so when we start to look at this, not only from a conference office, but even from just a United States, you see that over half of the states have either approved and or introduced a bill. And so it's something that we have to be mindful of. And we'll talk about a little bit about the landscape here in a minute in regards to the Big 12 conference. But again, these bills are going to vary on what they're going to affect. For the most part, if it's for an accreditation purpose or for grants, you're not going to see a whole bunch of bills being introduced or laws restricting that. But more so, we're seeing a lot where it's defunding programs, defunding offices, which means those positions are going to either be eliminated or they're going to have to be restructured or changed. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So again, for us, we just have to be mindful not only at a conference level, but also at a state level so that we can ensure that we're supporting our member institutions appropriately and how they need support. A little bit about the why. So when we think about why is this happening, some of the concerns that we're hearing in regards to the bills and why they're being introduced or why they have the anti-DEI legislation, I feel I should share this as well, is it undermines the traditional teaching of American history. It promotes discrimination or violates some of our discriminatory laws. It also makes certain groups, typically those of privilege, have some type of guilt where we have another discrimination piece. And so when you look at some of the legislation and why they're being introduced or why you hear a lot of it, that's typically the things that we're hearing in regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-discriminatory, anti-D&I legislation. Look at that, it's working now. All right. So looking at the Big 12 landscape, and so as I said, this is everyone's kind of learning here, and so I found it very interesting when I was pulling the numbers for this presentation, and I don't know why I hadn't wrapped my head around it before, but when we start looking at the Big 12 conference landscape, we currently have 14 institutions. We'll go up to 16 institutions come July of 2024, so this summer, obviously. We currently have 8 states that have either introduced or passed or approved an anti-D&I bill. And after we get our new institutions, we'll then have 9. And so again, that doesn't mean they've approved it, but again, that means they introduced it. So currently every one of our states where we have institutions has either proposed and or passed or approved an anti-DEI legislative piece. And so for us, again, we have to be very mindful of how we're approaching it, how we're offering support, and obviously being creative in this landscape. And so again, just a brief layout. As I mentioned, for some reason I didn't realize that every one of our states had introduced some type of legislation, so I was a little blown away. And then I was very thankful to be coming to Colorado to have this conversation, because obviously, as you can see that last slide there, Colorado is the only state incoming and or current. Yes, yes, yes. Pat yourselves on the back. Shout out to DeJuan. Stand up if you're here, DeJuan. Let us look at you. There he is, everyone in the back. So again, I was super excited to have this conversation because again, when you are having these conversations, they're tough conversations, right? Regardless if the place that you're going is receptive or not. And so just being mindful of that. And so again, when I started looking at the data, I was like, oh, wow, I don't know where I've been, but was kind of shocked to realize that, all of our states have introduced it. And as I mentioned, that doesn't mean they've approved it, but it's still there's that concern of where's that bill currently laying, and how do we continue to support or prepare our member institutions and those that we serve to continue to serve student athletes and fans in an appropriate manner. So some legislative updates, if you will, or strategies. And this is more of a bigger picture, an overall picture. We're really going to talk on a smaller scale at more of a state level and kind of how we're serving. This is a larger picture for us at the conference level, and so that's why you see Congress versus state legislation there. And so I'll spend most of my time today, or we'll spend most of our time today, really looking at the coordinated efforts of it, and then also the movement on grassroots efforts. And so the overall slide is really our planning for this year is in its infancy stages, and so we're still laying this portion out. I like to think of our legislative strategies as kind of our pregame strategies, if you will, and so kind of that being proactive of what's going to be passed at the congressional level, and then trying to identify those key members that we can connect with. And so we're introducing some new programming from our area of impact for this summer, and it's a study abroad program for our student athletes. And so it's a 2-year program with our first year being spent in Washington, D.C. And we are pretty intentional about spending our first year there because we think we have to, we feel we need to understand domestically what's taking place before we can even begin to travel internationally. But also we are choosing Washington, D.C. just based on the history and the diversity of that history that's there, and really wanting to educate our student athletes on a holistic standpoint, but also allowing them to have a day on Capitol Hill and being able to engage with some of our leaders there and really be able to have that student athlete voice, and not necessarily from a DEI standpoint, an impact standpoint, but really allowing them to understand how legislation works and being able to have a voice there. And so some of these are minute or smaller goals that we have right now, but this is an overall picture. And as I said, we'll really focus on the last 2 efforts as we move in to our conversation today. So I like to call this our game plan. As I mentioned, when we look at the legislative strategy I just showed, I feel like that's kind of our right? This is our pre-game plan. This is kind of where we're at. We're in the X's and O's, in the meat of it all. And so these are some very basic things that we've already begun to implement, or that's been implemented at a variety of institutions, not within the Big 12 Conference, but across the states that we work with. So whether that's Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, which is some of the states that have approved the anti-DEI legislation that's been posed there. And so some of the things that we'll talk about here, I like to call these some of our grassroots efforts, but there are also things that we're currently implementing as we continue to draw that bigger picture for ourselves. And so the first one is going to be language, and this is something that, how many do we have that's here that's from the University of Colorado? Okay, and then where's everyone else from? And if you didn't raise your hand, this is your question. Come on, Colorado State, say it loud. Y'all were louder than that when you came up here and introduced your flag. Okay, who else we got? This side over here didn't really raise a whole bunch of hands, so I know, and like my good friend here looking pretty in pink, I don't mind calling on you and bringing the mic around. Joanna, where are you from, hon? Yay, okay. Anybody else? Anybody else? So everyone on this side is Oklahoma State, Colorado, or Colorado State University. Okay, I love it. Okay, great. Just giving me an idea where we're at and where we're going. All right, so just going to kind of ask you all, I don't know if you've seen any changes. So when it comes to language, how many of you are seeing the words or the acronym DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, being used less? Okay, I see a hand in the back. Come on, hand. I wish I brought candy for you. 2 of them. So what are some of the other name changes that you're seeing? Impact, culture, belonging. I see a head nodding. Chief of people? Yep. Minority? Yep. Perfect. So this is what this piece is talking about here. So one of the strategies that we can begin to use is this language, just changing the language is what we're saying. Because when you begin to look at these anti-D&I laws, again, you see diversity, equity, and inclusion being really targeted. And so how can we begin, because again, when we talk about D&I, it's really about belonging, right? Because we can have diversity. Does that mean we have inclusion? I see a few no's, so let's ask it again. You can have diversity, but can you have inclusion? Yeah, so we can be diverse. We are in here very different. We have different color of hair, eyes, clothing. We're obviously from different places, Colorado State University versus Colorado. I love to see you both in the room. But again, does that mean you all feel like you're included? And so I think that's the difference. You have diversity where we're all different, but then you have that inclusion piece, which means we actually feel invited or welcomed in that space. And so that's typically the acronym or the wording you'll see in some of the laws. And so you'll see a lot of institutions, including ourselves, our chief impact officer, who I report to, she oversees our impact initiatives, community engagement, as well as academics and student-athlete success with myself. And so again, you'll see that. I heard campus and community belonging, campus and community engagement. We also have talent, culture, and engagement as well. And then you're beginning to see some of the different organizations or centers that may have been women's centers for women or LGBTQ centers. You're starting to also see their name changing as well. One example is an institution in Texas. They are now calling their place for diversity and inclusion the Center for Student Advocacy and Community versus their LGBTQ Resource Center. So again, you're starting to see those name changes where they're able to do the work but still aligning with whatever law is currently in place. We also have grants here, so I'm going to kind of group grants and creative funding together. I think that's a piece for us that we're looking into at the Big 12 Conference, but also when I was at the University of Oklahoma, that's something that we continue to do as well. Anybody in here at the 9 o'clock session? Ooh, y'all have been going at it. Y'all are ready for me to wrap up. I saw the look of despair like, girl, yes, please. Please, how many more slides do you have? And so we had Learfield Sports here with us. Ian Moses was here, and so he talked a little bit about partnering with your development team who can go out and kind of get you some of this money for these initiatives. There's tons of organizations and companies out there that are looking to put money in to show that they're inclusive and that they're creating a sense of belonging. So he mentioned some of those to you. And so when I was at the University of Oklahoma, I worked really closely with Learfield on how our initiatives could align. If you have an organization or a company that you're working with and they have a DEI piece in there, how can I program? And or if we already have an existing program that we can tie together. And so we're meeting our needs and goals institutionally, but also for our partner. And so again, that creative funding, because that's going to be a donation, so it's not going to be state funds that you then can use to do your programming for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, that money can look very different of where you're placing it. I'll give a shout out to Adidas at the Kansas University. So they do a lot of great things with Kansas, from helping to implement McClendon Fellows. Everybody familiar with the McClendon? Okay, I like the claps. Hey, stand up. Are you a fellow? Love it, yes. Come on now. So Adidas does a lot there to support that program at the University of Kansas, and then they also give a lot of funds to different cultural moments throughout. And so again, that's money that's coming from an outside source that Kansas is able to implement into their yearly budget. Kansas currently does not have any bills that's passed. They have one that's on the floor, but again, that's just another way to be creative. And so just kind of looking at your current partners and seeing what their needs are, and then how can you kind of begin to implement some of that. And so a great thing there. So again, just being creative funding. For us at the conference level, we understand that some of our institutions cannot participate in programming. And so if we were to implement some type of recommendation or requirement for them to participate in a DEI programming, it wouldn't be that successful, because we're putting some of our member institutions at risk of violating a law. We also understand that some of the goals that we have, they may not be able to carry out. And so how have we gone to support that? Well, if it's offered by the conference and the conference is paying for that, then Oklahoma State, OU, Texas, Texas Tech can then implement that or offer that type of programming to their student athletes, their faculty, staff, whatever the initiative may be, because that money is coming from the conference office and not through state funds at that individual institution. Does that make sense? And so we're looking at how we begin to, one, offer that and also develop some type of grants. So say it's everybody familiar with Black Student Athlete Summit? Okay. So for example, I want to send one of our institutions to Black Student Athlete Summit, and I want to pay for their staff to travel as well as a number of student athletes. We're looking at how do we create grants or some type of funding from the conference level that can feed back into our student athletes and our faculty and staff to help them kind of navigate that. So again, just creative funding. I know we've heard a couple of examples today, but that's it as well. I think another item I want to put out, because I know we have recreation in this, and believe it or not, I actually have a recreation background and served as a program coordinator in recreation. And so depending on how that recreation center is set up, is it private funding or is it public funding? And so can you partner with the 501c3 status that may be able to navigate some of that, or doesn't have to adhere to that state law? Can you partner with them in some way to navigate that space as well? Another thing that I've mentioned is coordinating efforts among conference members, campus and community and organizations, et cetera. And you'll see that piece. I'm going to go back one if my slide will work. Oh, I did it good. So you just never know with technology. Zoom is still trouble me. I'm like, we've been on Zoom for how long? And my camera's not working. I don't know what mic to be on. How do I share my screen? Who's sending me this message? Why did I respond to everyone as an individual message? Somebody help me. So as you can see here too, we're coordinating efforts among conference members, A5 conference and the NCAA. And so we're doing that at the conference level is how we can best serve you. But again, I'm looking more so here at that state and how you all can do that as well. And so coordinating efforts among conference members, campus, and community organizations. And so how can we partner with those that may not have as many restrictions as your current state does? To kind of support what they're doing. And so when I was at the University of Oklahoma, my good friend Joanna, that I'm just going to continue to call on today, at Oklahoma State University, there was a lot of collaboration that was taking part. So the state of Oklahoma passed what was called the Save the Women in Sports Act. Is anybody familiar with that? No? Okay, great. So it's an anti-transgender law, and so it looks to allow those to participate in sports both at the secondary level, can only participate in sports at the within the I can't even talk. Participate in sports as the sex they were assigned at birth. Does anybody know there's a difference between transgender and non-binary? I see one or two. I see two. I see a couple. I say, okay. So there is a difference between transgender and non-binary, right? And so the law touches on transgender. It doesn't touch on non-binary. So what it requires our student athletes to do is they have to sign an affidavit before they can participate in sports, saying that they are participating in a sport under the same gender that they were assigned at birth. And so they have to sign, that's a state law, they have to sign that. I believe their parents also have to sign it as well if they're under the age of 18. So they have to sign that before they can participate in athletics. But what the bill doesn't touch on is non-binary. And so, of course, at our institution, we have non-binary student athletes. And so making sure that we understand that legislation and what it's actually saying so that we can still support our student athletes in the way that they need to support, but also those that are traveling in, it doesn't hinder those individuals that may be from a state that doesn't prohibit that to be able to participate. And so, again, how can we coordinate those efforts? And so a lot of times it's nice to have someone else in your state that's kind of navigating that space with you so that you can lean on each other, but you can also push your athletics department to say, hey, but, you know, so-and-so or the other in Colorado State University is doing this, you know, can we not do this as well? And so that's kind of what we did as well. As I would call Joanna and I would say, hey, this is what we're doing. Like, what are you hearing? And what are your thoughts? And, you know, did I interpret this right? And so there was always nice to have that sounding board of where I was at, but also how I was interpreting. And so, again, just making sure that you're coordinating those efforts there. And then when we're thinking about how we move forward and get past the anti-DEI legislation, what are others doing? And is that community piece? Is that a nonprofit piece that we have? Is there a grant piece that we have? So how do we navigate that? And being able to really partner is going to help push your initiatives, but it's also going to give you that sense of support. How many sit full-time in DEI? That was a trick question. I hope DeJuan saw all of you raise your hands. Yeah, so most of us are going to sit in full-time in DEI, even if it's not in your title, right? The way your lived experiences, the lens that you view things, the way that you support your student athletes, your staff. So if you're not fully involved with student athletes or students in general, you have a staff, right? So you're still continually creating cultures of belonging, whether you're working directly with student athletes and or whether you're working with staff. And so all of you are experts and are full-time in DNI. All right. So again, just making sure that you're coordinating your efforts with individuals. I think the community is a really great place to focus your thoughts on too, and even your student organizations on campus when you're talking about campus. So community, again, is not always going to have the same restrictions that we have on a campus level, especially when we're looking at these current DNI, anti-DNI legislation pieces, but also your student organizations are typically not affected. So if you have student organizations on campus that are registered, they typically are not being hit by some of the bills or the laws that are being introduced, and so you can always lean on them to help support some of the initiatives that you are no longer able to do at the institutional level. Let's see. Oh, another key piece here as well, and I'm going to make Joanna share. I told you I was going to rely on her a lot today. As a faculty, and I got any faculty members here? What's a great thing about being a faculty member when you're creating your curriculum and you're teaching? It's two words. One's A. Say it again. Academic freedom. Does everybody know what academic freedom is? Would you love to tell us about academic freedom? She might need a mic. Here's a mic coming.
While she's answering, can I have athletic director freedom?
You know what? I'm going to ask Brett for you. And I'll get back to you. And if you can tell me your name.
Teresa.
All right, Teresa. Thank you, Ms. Teresa.
So academic freedom is the ability to speak about your subject matter as a subject matter expert based on your scientific background, your scholarship, your research area, and not to be targeted because you believe that the brain works in a certain way based on the science, you have the freedom to talk about it based on the science and the knowledge.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Teresa. So again, academic freedom. Faculty have what's called this academic freedom. So they have in the law, when I told you about curriculum, and I said most states do not affect curriculum. So that means that most states outside of Florida currently does not affect what's currently being taught. So they still have that academic freedom. And so if faculty have academic freedom, what do you think you should do if you're doing an initiative and you need someone that can, for lack of a better term, say what they want to say? Partner. And so I'm going to give a shout out to Joanna, because we were talking today and she was telling me we've been going back and forth and she's been wanting to do some training. And if you haven't heard, Oklahoma passed an executive order. Was it January? But they November, and then it goes in effect May of 2024, correct? So one, she needed to get the training in before May of 2024, right? And then two, she also was mindful that the executive order is already out. How do I safely navigate this while making everyone feel safe of what is being said, right? And how do I protect myself? So if I team up with faculty who still have academic freedom, then I'm able to serve my student athletes how they're requesting me to serve them. I'm able to fill my role as a leader in the field of impact, and I'm also able to build a partnership and a relationship with faculty on campus. It's pretty awesome, right? So again, just thinking outside of the box of how do we navigate this. So, yes, ma'am. That's a great question. In some states,
How is it that student organizations on campuses are not affected by the law?
anybody want to take a guess? It kind of goes along with academic freedom. It's an amendment. Say it again. Freedom of speech. Because athletic departments have the funding that's coming from the state. And so most student organizations, even though they're registered, it depends on how their funding is, but it's going to go back to freedom of speech. That was a tricky one for me too, and I'm glad you asked it, because I was trying to find a more in-depth answer this week when I was reading, because couldn't wrap my head around it as well, but it kept going back to that freedom of speech. There's one, it may be Iowa, and I'd have to go back and look. They don't have any bills that they have bills that are looking at targeting student organizations next. They haven't yet, but right now, most readings that I've read it's on that freedom of speech. Yeah, great question. Great question. I had the same one, so great question. Y'all are engaging this group right here. I like it. I'm gonna bring some of y'all over here. Okay. Just kidding. Just kidding a little bit. All right, I don't know where I'm at with time. Okay, I got 10 minutes. Y'all are excited as me? Okay, because that means we're getting to some good stuff here. All right, so talking about best practices, alignment, direction, and future planning. We've really covered a lot of it, but I'm just gonna wrap it up here in a summary for you. But again, most of it we've kind of covered and we've talked about here. So number one is just being proactive, just being aware of kind of what's the conversations that's taking place within your state. Now for you all, y'all are just amazing. I mean, y'all have passed laws in support of impact like in the last 2 years, and maybe sooner, maybe more recent. So again, just being proactive. Again, it's you all are going to engage with, if you don't already, and collaborate across states now, especially coming to the Big 12 Conference, and I know you already do that, but just being mindful. I think this is a really good conversation. I know I've been meeting with Chris and Lauren and DeJuan and Joe, have already been on a lot of our calls with me, and so again, your counterparts, I think it's really good for you coming into the conference that you have an idea of where your counterparts are at and where they may need your support, and just, you bring a level of expertise and a lens that they may not have, and so I'm really excited about just the differences that you'll be bringing in and that different perspective or that diversity of perspective that you'll be bringing in. So I'm excited about that. And so again, just being proactive, being mindful of what's coming up, what's being talked about at the state level, so that you can be proactive. And that doesn't mean that you'll be able to stop every bill, but at least you'll be able to understand what's taking place and best prepare your respective departments, the students you work with, the staff that you work with, on what's taking place. I think the biggest part is just ensuring a clear understanding of the policy, right? So what is the policy actually saying that I can and or cannot do? And I think that's a big piece. You'll see some of them that have nothing to do with women or gender. It's really race focused. So how do we navigate that? Again, we talked about it, some target curriculum, some have nothing to do with curriculum. Some are looking at completely defunding, and some of them are looking at how do we scale a budget back. So again, just really understanding what does that policy say so that you can understand how to navigate it. I think the second thing or the third thing here I guess you could do is really identify all of your areas of D&I. So what are your D&I positions? What are your programs? What are your departments that you have? What activations or initiatives do you have? What does your D&I policy say? And then taking what you currently have that's operating and aligning it or seeing how it needs to align with the current policy that's taken place. So again, does that mean we have a program that's operational? Does that mean we need to restructure? Or are there going to be some things that we completely eliminate? And so I think it's going to depend on that policy, right? And so again, what does the policy say? And understanding it. What do we currently have in place? And what do we need to do to align them? Eliminate, restructure, or is it operational? And so again, that's going to look different at every level. Any questions? So I know we got about 7 minutes, and I'm going to keep everybody on time. So we're getting to discussion and reflection. So that kind of wraps up me leading this discussion. And so I really want to turn it back over to you all. Again, I don't do Q&As, but I will answer any questions, just so you know now and even afterwards. I always love a good chat after. But I just really want to talk about reflection. I'm sorry. Let me get us together. Here we are. Discussion and reflection. And so out of the things that we've talked about, again, you could be new to the state of Colorado. You may have a counterpart at another state that, this is what we're doing, they're doing, and it's really great. So I just want to give 3 to 4 minutes here, and I know that's really short time frame, just for you all to share maybe your experience. Again, we have individuals in the room that, are sitting in the space where they are trying to navigate that anti-D&I legislation. You obviously are joining calls with the conference office now, so you'll have counterparts that are there. And so, again, or you may be joining from outside of the state of Colorado, and so you may have already experienced some of those things. So just really want to give a little bit of time for you all to share some of your experiences, because, again, this is a co-learning space, and I need to drink a water. So... again, just want to give you an opportunity to share any additional thoughts on things that we've mentioned, or maybe something that I've overlooked that you think would be valuable to this conversation.
Just to put a disclaimer out there, Dr. Bean and I did not know that we were coming to this conference together, and it was about 2 days before we got here that we realized we were going to be here. So I'm very thankful that she's here. So I'm not a plant. She did not intentionally bring me here for this purpose, but I feel like I needed to make that disclaimer for everyone. It was actually DeJuan's invite with ADID meeting that made me want to attend this. But something that everyone can understand, Dr. Bean has talked a lot about executive orders, laws, legislation. So the best thing I can say, and I can say this to certain people in the room, is leadership, getting behind that, especially in athletics, like at OSU. 40% of our student athletes identify as something other than white, right? So when we have such a large population, very diverse, coming from a lot of different states, some states who do not have this type of legislation, it's really figuring out as leadership, how do we navigate this and show support? So I sit on senior staff at Oklahoma State. Our athletic director has, it's new to us. So we're still trying to figure out from the institution, what that risk and what they're willing to do. The problem with our executive order is it's very ambiguous, right? There is no black and white lines, and we do not know what that line is gonna be. We know we can't use state funding, but we don't know, does that mean I can't send a staff member out to LA because we have 10 student athletes heading out there and they need like someone out there to chaperone to help get them from the airport to that? Can we use state funding to do that? Or is it just for the registration? So as we're navigating, Dr. Bean is correct, a lot of it has to do with the institutional partnerships. I've had to rely on a lot of our VPs across campus. I represent athletics for a lot of cross-campus groups, and luckily Chad, our AD, has put me in charge of kind of creating those relationships. That has been very instrumental in trying to navigate it. And, you know, when I have student athletes coming to me and saying that they have experiences on their team of microaggression, hair touching, a lot of different things, and I can't go into that space and educate those coaches or educate those student athletes, that's very hard. So I do have to rely on faculty and my faculty partnerships. And so I would highly recommend in this room, if you don't have those partnerships or have not started that process, to please do so. And AD, if you have not encouraged your staff to do so, please encourage them to do so, because I could not do what I do without the partnerships with the campus.
Thank you, Joanna, and for the disclaimer. Yeah. But I'm going to start taking her with me now. Go ahead, Chris. You can just come stand up here with me.
Can you go back to the slide, the map?
Yeah.
Because I just want to ask a
can
question
attempt.
of everyone here.
There you go.
So when I first was thinking about going back to the Big 12, I have a big concern. But when you look at this, we have this within our own conference right now. Colorado State, you can look at your conference as well. Has anyone, staff, students, coaches, administration, have there been any problems going into Oregon, Utah, Arizona? I'm curious. I'm curious to know if we've faced any problems at this point. Okay, thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you, Chris. Yes, we got one over here. Thank you.
Right, wouldn't that be fun? To that point, and I know it's not a direct answer of that question, sorry, my name is Erin Patchett. I work on the collegiate rec side of things. Maybe you saw me earlier trip off the stage twice at the 10 o'clock session. So I can't answer your question directly, but I'm going to also offer a reframe on how in NERSA, within our association, our version of the NCAA or Big 10 or Big 12 conferences, things like that, we're having to even think about like our staff and if they're going to feel safe going to these states, not to compete, but to get professional development. So our conference this year is in Phoenix. Next year it's in Orlando. And we haven't changed our site selection decisions, but I know there are going to be members of our association who do not feel like they can go to Florida safely and professionally develop themselves. So that's another twist on this, is how do you go off to even the NCAA, conference, if that's not what it's called, whatever you call it, and feel safe there too as an athlete and a staff member. And then one more thing that I was actually going to stand up and say is, if you are a collegiate rec professional, I just want to point out another NERSA resource, because apparently I'm a NERSA fangirl today. But there's actually a governmental affairs committee for our association that does a lot of this tracking for us. So if you need something else to read, they go out pretty frequently, those updates, and they're federal level and state level. So you can kind of keep an eye on what's going on across our nation, but also maybe something you're not aware of that's being proposed. That's actually how I found out about something did happen here in Colorado recently where someone tried and it made it nowhere, thank goodness, because we're in a state right now that supports diverse humans. But I wouldn't have known about it, honestly, without that resource, so I encourage you to check it out. Thanks.
Thank you, Erin. And just to touch on one thing that you said, Erin, or maybe two, when we talk about NCAA and championships, there's a document that you have to fill out. So the state, if you're going to host the NCAA championship, typically there's a host institution, and then that host institution actually has to fill out, I think it's a 2-page document stating how if your state does have an anti-DEI law or discriminatory law, how you're going to actually support and make sure that those individuals that are coming to participate is going to feel safe, and you've put those parameters in place. So there is some type of buffer. So great point when you brought that up, is the NCAA does have that document that has to be filled out before they approve you as a host site to ensure that everyone is safe. And then also you mentioned professional development, which I think is really great. And so that's another concern at some of our states that have this legislation already been approved, is how do we now go get professional development for maybe, I believe Jennifer mentioned women in sports, women leaders in sports. So now if we're wanting in the state of Oklahoma or Texas, I'm just using them as examples because there's bills that have been approved, can we use funds from our athletics departments to send individuals to that type of leadership conference? And so this is something that we're looking at, is that one of those grants, again, is how do we support that type of professional development at our member institutions for those that may need that as well. So great. All right, anybody else before we wrap up? Yes, ma'am. Can Zoe get a mic? And then this will be our last one, and then I'll leave you with a thought and a video.
Hi, Dr. Bean. Thank
Hey,
you for
love.
being here. My name is Zoe Gazelle. I work in our marketing department here at Colorado. I'm curious, going into this conference or rejoining this conference, what it looks like for these other member institutions, dedicating games to things like pride and inclusivity, and where they're frankly dealing with the anti-DE&I laws. What does that look like for them, and are they allowed to do those kinds of things?
So great question. I think it's going to vary. As of now, we haven't seen like cultural moments or games being dedicated. We haven't seen any pushback there. That doesn't mean that we won't, but as of now, we haven't seen pushback. We've obviously seen some of our schools in the conference change the way that they go about celebrating certain things. And Joanna, you can share. I don't know if you've had any pushback at Oklahoma State, but for most of ours, I think in being transparent and coming from, this isn't a Big 12 conference comment, this is an institutional comment. When I was at an institution, things like pride and LGBTQ awareness wasn't something across the board that was highly supported or highly visual for in-game items. We do have a Big 12 conference, our Big 12 LGBTQ conference, a student-athlete conference that we would send and pay for individuals to go to. But I would say that wasn't something that I've seen across our institutions. And again, that's not a conference comment, that's more of an institutional comment in my experience at the institutional level. You didn't see a lot of that in marketing. And again, being transparent, unless like maybe one of our coaches was really pushing for it. I haven't seen a lot of pushback on like some of our cultural moments, so Hispanic Heritage Month, Native American Heritage Month, women and girls in sports. I haven't seen that at our institutions that are in states that have a legislative piece in place. So that's a great question, though. Yeah. All right. So again, I appreciate everybody's time and attention and the information that you've shared in your lived experience. I think, as I mentioned to you before when I asked you how many people said in DEI full-time? All of us. So great. And so I want to leave you, as we wrap up, I'm going to leave you with a quote and a video. And so I think the quote is it's from a group of student leaders in Texas. It's called Texas Students for DEI. And I think it's best said, and it kind of embodies what we said and what we shared here, that everybody's job is D&I, and that D&I is actually in us. And so what they said is the implementation of D&I offices and practices may be banned from college campuses, but the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion can never be removed from us, the people. We, those who care about academic pursuit, who want to engage with, learn from, and walk beside people of all backgrounds, and who welcome all people, cannot be stopped. And so I think this video really encompasses that for us at the Big 12 level of just our continued support for our students and our fans when we look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and more importantly, just impact and belonging. So you may have to play it.
Almost heaven, West Virginia.
Y para los nuevos 4 que vienen, bienvenidos.
Down, Oklahoma State. Welcome to Stillwater.
One thing's clear, we've always been ready to twist.
Perfect. And appreciate your time and attention. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them after, happy to have further conversations. If you want to reach out to me, here's my email. Feel free to take it down, and always welcome to engage in any conversations. Thank you again for having us.
Test. Thank you, Dr. Bean. Definitely appreciate you. Let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Bean and all of our presenters for the day. Bear with me for 1 second. Before you go, I'm going to ask everybody to please take out your phone, iPad, tablet, whatever device you use that has a camera, and I'm going to put up the survey with the QR code. Please complete the survey. It would help us immensely. And as I'm pulling that up, I'll finish with some closing remarks, and then we'll finish for the day. But just think of some Jeopardy music for the next about 15 seconds. So as you are doing that, first, thank you for participating and attending. I also want to give a big thank you to our Inclusive Sports Summit committee that helped us put on all the sessions with Louisa Rosen, Irene Christoforou, Tommy Woods, Ty Dowdy, Jill Spears, myself, and Tony Price. And I also want to thank Buff Vision and CU Rec Services for being great partners with us to be able to execute the summit at a high level. So let's give them a round of applause as well. The last thing that I will leave with you all, throughout the day, if you have not noticed, I hope it was at least somewhat visible or able to kind of be brought out. But a lot of our sessions today, we really tried our hardest to be able to balance between the theme of breaking barriers and building bridges. And so throughout our sessions, some of the barriers that we've seen and heard as a committee and as individuals who are connected to DEI are things like diversity, equity, and inclusion does not impact the bottom line, or there can be no funds generated, or nobody's asking for that, so why do we need to make it or build it? Or DEI is dead because of the legislation that's happening around the country. And so throughout all the sessions today, we've really tried our hardest to be able to bring presenters and individuals and perspectives to say, what are we breaking down from a barrier perspective, and what bridges are we building to invite people and connect to this work? And so throughout our sessions, again, we talked about how are ways that we actually can connect diversity, equity, and inclusion to the financial dollars of the organization. What are ways that we actually can build it, even though nobody is asking for it? What are ways that if we're moving into a new conference where all the states have some legislation and we're the only one that doesn't, how do we build a bridge to the other institutions to be able to show them that this work is possible, that we can do it at a high level? And so I invite you all to continue to build that bridge with us, to be able to create and really connect with one another and with the institutions and the organizations that we'll continue to work with on a day-to-day basis and throughout the rest of our time in the Big 12 and beyond, for that matter, to know that this work is still impactful, it still changes lives, and it still allows us to create connections and build communities with one another and show everybody else what is possible as well. And so I will leave you with one quote from Ataye Grande, who's an author, who's an immigrant author here to the US, who says, "The wise always builds bridges in times of crisis. The foolish dig deep and double down on building walls." And so I continue to invite you all to continue to build the bridges that we need to continue to cross the paths, to continue to do this work on a high level. So thank you very much for your time, effort, and energy today. Please complete the survey. Please complete the survey. Please complete the survey. And we will see you again next year.